koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. My name is Garry Williams. Thanks very much for the introduction, Masood. I don't want to disappoint you all, but I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. It's called Tech Talk for a reason, I suppose. And while I love a challenge, Masood, telling a story that spans almost a decade in 7 minutes is pushing it a bit, but I'll give it a go. So in my role here at the Ministry of Education, I'm responsible for a range of programs, amongst other things, contributing to the transformation of education delivery after the 2010-11 Christchurch earthquakes. And I'm also the digital technology champion for our region, which is somewhat ironic because I need to give my nephew a ring anytime I want to do anything on my phone. The education sector in Christchurch was pretty badly affected by the earthquakes. Jan made mention of that in her presentation. And not only physically, but mentally as well. I think it's important to acknowledge the immense additional demands on our school leaders and teachers in very extraordinary circumstances. And they've done an amazing job and continue to do an amazing job supporting their students, even while their personal lives were equally disrupted. The damage to the education infrastructure was significant. So Jan talked about the buildings at Technorium and things like that. And the task and the cost to repair it was just such a colossal challenge. But prior to the earthquakes, the ministry had already started on a program to modernise teaching practice in New Zealand and to create more flexible learning environments. And despite the challenges that the earthquakes brought to us, we saw an incredible opportunity to accelerate that shift to modern and innovative spaces and teaching practices across our region. We had a very clear signal from very extensive consultation that the time was right to embrace new and innovative and bolder initiatives that would see greater cooperation and sharing of resources with our young people as the priority and right at the heart of everything we do. And to this day, the fundamental principle of all the work that we do here at the ministry in Christchurch is we put people first, pedagogy second, and property last. Because if you take them out of that order, things just don't work. But as is the Kiwi way, I'm going to start with the property first rather than last because it just sets a bit of context around the sort of challenge that we were facing. So many of our school buildings here were old, they weren't particularly weathertight, they weren't at all suited to modern teaching practices and not necessarily designed for the needs of students with physical disabilities. So in November 2013, we launched a regional 10-year rebuild program that included the construction of 13 new schools on brand new sites. We demolished and rebuilt 10 new schools on existing sites. We're in the process of fully redeveloping 34 schools and partially developing another 58 schools. And each of those 115 schools in the program receives a dedicated budget for its project. And the total of that spend is estimated to be at about $1.13 billion. I suppose we could have just put things back together the way they used to be for probably less than half that cost. But actually what we wanted to do was seize the opportunity to not only address the historical deficiencies, but more importantly to end up with schools that actually serve the future needs of our communities. And I guess the big difference compared to the historical approach to our capital works programs was a philosophical U-turn that puts students and teachers right at the heart of the design process instead of at the end of it. And that shift in philosophy has been facilitated and greatly enhanced by a program called Grow Waitaha, which is one of several very unique and innovative programs that I have the privilege of managing here in Christchurch. And Grow Waitaha came out about through a genuine and effective collaboration between 4 expert educational providers and our foundational partner in our work, Mataraka Mahanui, which is an organisation that was created to include Ngāi Tahu, which is our local iwi, to include Ngāi Tahu content in the spaces and curricula and in the hearts and the minds of education providers across Greater Christchurch. Our core focus in that program is on helping schools to develop learning practices, team teaching cultures, and the use of flexible spaces that work best for them. And it's resulted in connected and networked schools, principals and teachers cross-pollinating and collaborating through subject-specific workshops, regular meetings of principals and senior leadership teams, and communities of learning that were established between schools in particular areas of the region. Grow Waitaha also collects and collates resources as they're developed and share really good and practical examples of innovation to other schools across Canterbury, across the other regions in New Zealand, and even to other countries, which is fantastic. And as with any transformation program, our experiences haven't always been successful, and we've learned quite a lot along the way. But our successes and our challenges and the teething problems that we have in that space are all captured and analysed by an evaluation team that sits within the program that documents our progress and feeds back into the overall program development. And one of the big game changers, I think, in education in Canterbury has been our partnership with Mataraka Mahanui. We've established 5 roles as iwi-based facilitators to lead a working partnership between mana whenua, which are the indigenous people of the land, and our schools that brings local knowledge to the creation of curriculum resources and professional development. And today we're seeing a real shift towards the systemic inclusion of Māori language, culture and identity in our schools. And it's developing an expectation that all adults across the school system have an understanding and an expectation of Māori succeeding as Māori. Other work over the last couple of years includes strengthening the positioning of digital technologies in the New Zealand curriculum through the introduction of compulsory learning areas of computational thinking and designing and developing digital outcomes. And we've placed a huge focus on students building their skills so they can be innovative creators of digital solutions, moving right beyond just being consumers of digital technologies. And there's good reason to do that. We all know that technology is rapidly changing the way we communicate, the way we share and process information, and the way we learn and work. And I think the challenge has been and always is for educators around preparing students for a future where work is going to look really different, and the jobs of today might not even exist by the time that they get out of school and go through the tertiary system and or trade system and end up in work. Our young people need to be able to demonstrate advanced skills in problem solving, critical thinking, verbal communication and interpersonal skills. But they also need really strong foundational skills in maths and science, as well as strong technical skills in digital technology and the skills in designing technology solutions to solve problems and meet customer need. And I think our schools in Canterbury have really embraced a much more holistic approach towards implementing the curriculum content and to providing students with even broader opportunities to learn in and about technology. There's been quite a lot of talk since the COVID lockdown highlighting inequality that exists within the education system and more broadly across the community. And whilst acknowledging a much deeper set of issues affecting equity, the lack of access to a device and the internet is a tangible representation of inequality in our system. So during the lockdown, our priority was for students to have at least one channel available to support learning at home, while also taking the opportunity to narrow that digital divide a bit through the delivery of internet connections to student households that didn't have one, and a device to every student that didn't have one. And alongside that, with the provision of 2 learning channels on television and the delivery of educational hard packs across all age groups, it meant that most of our students had some continuity of learning during the lockdown period, which in New Zealand was the best part of sort of 6 weeks. And teachers were supported in their efforts in remaining connected with students in whānau. While we're quite pleased with what we achieved, we acknowledge that we didn't always get it right. The scope and scale and speed with which we acted did mean that there was quite a bit of risk of getting things wrong, but it's also the reason I think we achieved as much as we did, and ironically raised a whole lot of expectations because of that. We've heard over the recent month since lockdown some really positive stories about greater levels of interest and involvement of parents in their children's learning, and the greater emphasis given to learner well-being and addressing the particular needs in each of those contexts. We've also heard less positive stories about parents under pressure in homes where several siblings are all trying to access support at the same time, and in other cases where parents were involved in essential work and not actually at home and available to provide the level of support that was probably expected. And of course, there were the inevitable technology failures. So some kids didn't get a device, some kids weren't connected, and for those that were, there was just a complete lack of technical support on hand to address any sort of issues as they arose. But honestly, I don't think we need to be too harsh on ourselves. What we experienced during COVID was never going to amount to a coherent and consistent program of distance learning. What we faced was an emergency response to an urgent situation that affected everybody. There was simply not enough time for teachers and learners and parents to prepare, and I think everyone just got on with it. What it highlighted for me, though, was how people coped under those circumstances. And you heard from Jan, Techtorium coped particularly well because they were ready for it, doing a few different things. And what I'm interested is in the practices that enabled schools and teachers to transition quite easily into working into a different environment, and equally those that didn't. But I think because of our experience in Christchurch over the last decade, we've probably had more practice than most in working collaboratively with others to solve problems. And I do like to think that we're better off for it. Since the earthquakes and through several other adverse events, such as the Port Hill fires in 2017, the extensive flooding of the city in 2018, and the dreadful shootings of March the 15th, 2019, we have co-designed and implemented new initiatives, new practices, new systems, new environments, and new thinking that is setting the standards for the rest of the country. And every one of those events has forced me to consider and nurture a broader range of partnerships and deliberately integrate the activities and resources I'm responsible for to provide more innovative support, which contributes to the place that we've got to, and in Christchurch especially. I think had COVID-19 happened a decade ago, we'd probably just have closed our schools and not given too much thought to the well-being of students or continuing their learning. And the fact that we didn't is a great result. Thanks for listening, and thanks for having me.